I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker today. Cliff May, who I've had the pleasure of sharing lunch with, is the founder and president of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. We in the council have had the benefit of hearing recently from two of his outstanding staff members, Ivana Stadler, who we heard from this morning, and about a year ago or so, Benim Ben Talib, their resident expert on Iraq. Both have been stunning. And I'm sorry. And
Don Jensen has.
And Don, I'm sorry, Don Jensen. I apologize, Don. My oversight. Three of his outstanding staff. Oh, but and so I think you're about to hear another stunning presentation from the very head of the foundation. Cliff's had a long and distinguished career in international relations, journalism, communications, and politics. As a veteran news reporter for the New York Times and other publications, he's covered stories on countries around the world, from Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Israel, the West Bank, Jordan, Egypt, and on, a great deal concentrated in the Middle East, but not only there, in Europe and Central Europe and Central Asia as well. He was, from 2016 to 2018, a commissioner in the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, an independent bipartisan U.S. federal government commission, making recommendations to the Secretary of State and Congress. Cliff, it's wonderful to have you with us, and we look forward to your remarks to cap off our conference.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you, of course, to Paul. Thanks to all of you at the council. I'm so pleased to be here, honored to be speaking with you. And it's customary to say that, but it's really true, particularly, I mean, this is such an interesting and newsworthy and news-packed week that I'm particularly eager to have a conversation with you. And I'm going to open with some remarks. I hope they'll be provocative, but then I hope there'll be questions and we can argue with me, you can correct me. That's all fine. I actually quite enjoy all of that. So feel free. I'll try to be relatively brief so we can have a good conversation, not least about what's going on right now, but about every day. But let me, I also have to say, I love the theme that you picked, Bullies Without Borders. It really is very consistent with our thinking at Foundation for Defense of Democracies, which I'll tell you a little bit more about soon. And it just so happens that not long after Putin invaded Ukraine, I was having a conversation with Waller Newell. I don't know if any of you know that name. He's not very well known. He's not a public intellectual, but he's a scholar, a political scientist. He's Canadian, and he has focused his entire career on tyrants and tyrannies throughout the ages. Very interesting specialization. And I happened to be talking with him after that, and it came up, of course, that just several days before the invasion, this most recent invasion of Ukraine, which was February 24th, 2022, Putin and Xi Jinping signed a no-limits partnership, as you know. That's interesting. It's interesting the timing of that they did that. And then we were talking also about Tehran and Tehran's military assistance that was going to Moscow as well. And Waller said to me, it's really kind of, it's kind of like an axis is forming. I said, yeah, right, an axis. I said, you're the world's expert on tyrannies. Is it an axis of tyrannies? He said, yeah, it sort of is. And just to remind you, we all use the phrase axis. Do you guys remember where that phrase originated?
World War II.
Huh?
World War II.
Huh?
No.
Oh, no.
World War II. World War II.
Oh, I'm sorry, that's Mussolini, 1936. He said that an axis was forming. Around that axis was Nazi Germany and fascist Italy, and predicted that soon many other European nations would be revolving around that axis. his prediction was quite right. He said the axis was for peace, propaganda even back then. That's where the axis goes back to, is Mussolini. So Waller and I wrote a column, weekly column for the Washington Times these days. And I said, let's do a column on this, and we did a column on this, and the axis metaphor has taken on now. People use axis of authoritarians, axis of adversaries. We at FDD, we now talk about the axis of aggressors, rather. And it's absolutely, of course, Tehran, well, Beijing, Moscow, Tehran, but we also include Pyongyang. North Korea is very much involved now in this, as I think you know. North Korea has been sending not just troops to Putin, but more importantly, munitions. The defense industrial base of North Korea is really quite amazing. So they can send, artillery shells in huge numbers. They make many more than we do in the United States. And they have huge stores of them now, and they've been sending them. As for the soldiers, a lot of them get killed. But those that returned are combat hardened and probably very good at what they do. And in addition, we are pretty clear on this from our research that Putin, all this is being given by Kim Jong-un to Putin, not simply as a favor, but also he expects something in return, and Putin understands that. And what is he getting in return? Probably technologies for North Korean submarines, intercontinental ballistic missiles. All of this makes North Korea a much more dangerous adversary of South Korea, of Japan, and of the US. We have troops on Guam, for example. It is American territory. Imagine the utility, the usefulness of North Korea should Beijing decide, should Xi Jinping decide it's now time for me to invade Taiwan and conquer it and take it over. I mean, that's very important. So we're looking at, and I would say this is kind of central to Foundation for Defense of Democracies right now, the four most endangered and beleaguered democratic societies in the world. Obviously, that's Ukraine. Putin wants to deprive Ukraine of its independence, its sovereignty, its freedom, its culture, its language, all of the above. Obviously, it's Israel, although I think Israel has just won a very important war, not the last world fight, but a very important war against the Islamic Republic of Iran and its proxies. This was a 7-front war. Everybody's focused on Gaza and Hamas. They were also fighting Hezbollah. They were also fighting against Iran, which missile salvos in huge numbers back in April and October. Hezbollah, of course, you know what happened there. Palestinian Islamic Jihad, the Houthis in Yemen, they're not defeated yet. A lot has happened, but the difference is, of course, Putin wants to subjugate the people of Ukraine. Xi Jinping wants to subjugate the people of Taiwan. The Islamic Republic of Iran, Hamas, and Hezbollah want to exterminate the people of Israel. So this is where we have four most endangered, most beleaguered democratic societies, and we have, as you say, the Bullies Without Borders, in particular the four I've mentioned, led by the most powerful communist party in all history, along with Moscow, neo-imperialists, along with Tehran, Islamists, along with Kim Jong-un, I don't know, a dynastic dictatorship, I don't know exactly what you'd call him. And we also have, we're looking at this increase in what we're calling the axis of enablers, who are very much on the side of these four. And who do I have in mind? Well, obviously Cuba, obviously Venezuela, increasingly South Africa, I'm sorry to say. And we're looking at it through BRICS and through the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Both Xi Jinping and Putin are trying to bring others into their orbit, because you understand what all these countries are ideologically not the same at all, but they have common enemies and common aspirations, mainly the diminishment of the United States as a world leader and the end to the what we tend to call, people like you and I, the international rules-based liberal American world order. which began at the end of World War II, when the U.S. decided we're not going to be a typical hegemon, we're not going to be a typical empire, we're going to set up a system of international law and international organizations, and they say, that's fine, we now have to transform this into something else where we make the rules, and America does not. And anyway, we can go on and on about that, but I won't, we'll come back to that when we have in the discussion. I want to tell you a little bit about why I was talking with Waller Newell about these subjects and how that came about. And it goes back to 2001. And it goes back to 2001, about a week before the attacks of 9/11. And from my journalistic career, I had various people I knew, and two came to visit me. One was Gene Kirkpatrick and one was Jack Kemp. Now, everybody here nods when I say that, and that's good to hear that. I gotta tell you, when we get interns from Georgetown and I say, yeah, Jack Kemp and Gene Kirkpatrick, they have no idea what I'm talking about, and I find that very disturbing. They should know. So they came into my office. I was working briefly. I was no longer in journalism full time. I was working with a consulting firm, say. And they said, you know what's on our mind? We think the United States is taking a holiday from history. Everybody thinks that the Soviet Union is no more, the Berlin Wall fell, we have no enemies to worry about. We're not sure this, what the Israelis would call concepcia, this conception of reality, is quite correct. I mean, Cliff, they said, who hit us in Lebanon in 1983 and why? Who hit us in New York City in 1993 and why? Who hit us at Khobar Towers in Saudi Arabia in 1996? Who blew up two of our embassies in Africa in 1998? Who hit the USS Cole off the coast of Yemen in 2000? Anybody know? You know? So, well, all I want you to do, Cliff, a little research project for you. Is anybody focusing on this? Is anybody trying to connect the dots? Is anybody, maybe it's, I don't know, in academia, maybe it's in the news business, maybe there are think tanks working on this, maybe, I don't know. Just figure out, is anybody serious about this, trying to come up with a comprehensive understanding of what we face and who's driving terrorism, who's just go look. Great assignment, what fun, I'll go do it. And then as I suggested, a few days later, I mean, maybe a week, I can't remember the exact date, 9/11 happens, the attacks of 9/11. And I meet with them again. And I said, this is what you feared and anticipated, isn't it? And they said, it is, that's exactly. So what have we found out? I said, nobody's looking at this. Nobody's doing what you're talking about. I can't find anybody. Nobody. Why is that? I said, the best I can tell is because driving terrorism, justifying terrorism, all the attacks on the US, the motivations behind it are not so much ideological as they are theological. And no one wants to talk about religion. I said, you know, it's interesting. I said, when I was at the New York Times, for a while, I spent 3 years as an Africa correspondent, West Africa bureau chief. And I remember going to my editors and saying, you know, Samuel Huntington has an interesting theory about the borders of the Islamic countries being bloody. I said, you know, and I had been in Sudan, and I said, I could do an interesting piece on this if you let me. And they kind of laughed at me, no, you're not going to do that piece. We don't want to do a piece like that. Are you kidding? Well, it's interesting. Okay, so then what happened is, just so you know, they said, okay, if that's the case, give us a memo. If we wanted to create an organization to work on these issues, what would it look like? Everything you can think. Went back, came up with a concept, came back with a name. It's a bit of a mouthful, but it is held up. The Foundation for Defense of Democracies, democratic societies, free nations, all of which are endangered by authoritarians, by terrorists, by Islamists, by jihadis, et cetera, et cetera. We were mostly worried about terrorism at that point. Most of the terrorists were non-state actors, with one very glaring exception being the Islamic Republic of Iran. I'll tell you more about that in a minute. And so I came up with that, a mission statement, a business plan. I gave them all, I said, here it is. Here's what I think. And they said, this is good, we like this, I think this needs to exist. And I said, well, great. Let me know if I can be helpful to you in any other way. I'm your buddy, right? And they said, no, just sit down. After what happened on 9/11, I spent 6 months trying to find somebody to put this together. You've got a blueprint here. I can tell you're kind of obsessed with this anyhow, like we are. Quit your job and you do this. And they were right that I was kind of obsessed with it. And there were 2 reasons I would say at that moment. 2 people I knew died on 9/11, one in New York, one in Washington. That was personal. But here's the other reason. I was a young foreign correspondent in Iran in 1979. And I covered the revolution there. I can tell you a lot of stories. And not hard to convey those stories. And but what it became very clear to me when I was over there, and I was young and I was wet behind the ears, and it wasn't clear to most of my colleagues, this was not an Iranian revolution. It was an Islamic revolution. Very clear. And it also became clear pretty soon, we can talk about this, but that although this revolution was Persian and Shia, it had an effect, a galvanizing effect on the Sunni Arab world, because in the Sunni Arab world, people were soon saying, what a humiliation this is. The first modern nation state devoted to jihad against the West. And it's not Sunni, it's not Arab. Where is our jihadi state against the West? It should be the Saudis. But the royals are having too damn good a time skiing in Stade, shopping in Paris, drinking whiskey with their infidel friends in Washington. And I would tell you from that seed, it did Al Qaeda grow. Okay. Now, one more thing before maybe 2 more things before we go to conversation. One is when we started FDD and I started in, I quit my job pretty quick and we opened our doors by January 2nd, 2002. We thought, and I thought, this is not so hard because it's mostly non-state actors and it's just terrorism. And after 9/11, surely everybody will understand how terrible terrorism is. Surely it'll stain any cause that it's associated with. All that was wrong, of course. But it was also something else. I thought that's all there is. Why? Because if you think back to then, most people thought, Russia was going to become like Poland has become. It was going to be liberalized, and Putin was an okay guy, right? Bush looked into his eyes and saw when he's trustworthy. And as for China, what happened in 2001? Who remembers? They were brought into the World Trade Organization. Right? And for the most part, Republicans and Democrats, conservatives and liberals thought this was a good idea. For the moment, there were a few dissents, but most. Why? Because there was a theory. Ivana talked a little bit about this, I think, a few minutes ago. The theory was, we'll help them get rich, and once they get rich, they will become moderate. They will become liberal. They will become good citizens, good members of the international world order, and blah, 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 all that sort of stuff. This has to happen. This was also Angela Merkel's whole idea. I forget the German phrase she used, trade for peace. You remember what her phrase was? Anyhow, the German, okay, never. Anyhow, this is the phrase I used to know, handel reversion. Anyhow, this was a theory. And the most generous thing you can say, and I'll say it is, this was an experiment that had to be run. Let's see if we don't push them out, bring them in, if we help make them rich, maybe then they will want. And we've now run the experiment, and we know the answer. And by the way, I'll also say this. Matt Pottinger, I don't know if you know who he is, you definitely should. He was in the first national security Mandarin speaker. He now chairs our Asia program at FDD. He was working with H.R. McMaster. He chairs our military center at FDD. Fluent in Mandarin, and he starts to think, what is Xi Jinping saying to the 100 million Communist Party cadres, his comrades, in his speeches and writings only in Mandarin? Because he has to communicate with them. Never mind what he's telling us with an interpreter. What's he telling them? And he came up with it. His thesis was very clear. These are not our friends. Xi Jinping wants to rule the world. He wants China to rule the world. He wants the Communist Party. He uses phrases like a common destiny for mankind. Let me tell you what that common destiny for mankind is. Chinese communist domination of the world. And he understood that, and this has changed a lot of perceptions, not enough. And anyhow, I'll say one more thing. We're now working actually on a monograph that's being overseen by Brad Bowman, who is the senior director of our military center, brilliant guy, West Point graduate, West Point professor, helicopter pilot, worked in the Senate for about 9 years on national security issues. What we're going to show are all the multiple ways in which the members of this Bullies Without Borders Axis of Aggressors are cooperating and helping each other militarily, economically, diplomatically, in all kinds of ways. And it's going to be huge how, to the extent to which they are interwoven now to further their ambitions and to do harm to America and America's allies. I mean, the Chinese are helping the Houthis now. We have information that suggests. I mean, we need to understand this. We need to understand that we are in, people like Neil Ferguson, the great historian, talked about this for some years. We are already in a second Cold War, unless you see it as merely the extension of the first Cold War after a brief hiatus. And we are not mobilized for this Cold War. There's all kinds of ways we need to do it. I won't go into all of them here, but part of it is you certainly got to spend on defense what you spent during the height of the Cold War, because this is a much more challenging Cold War than the first Cold War, against much better armed, richer, and more determined adversaries, and quite a few of them. So if you're going to have a Department of War, great, but funded as a Department of War, not a Department of Defense. We're talking something like 5% of GDP, probably have to do it. Again, it's expensive, but as H.R. McMaster always said, it's always cheaper to deter a war than fight a war. And it's much cheaper to deter a war than to fight a war and lose a war. So I'm going to stop with that. And again, feel free to argue with me, feel free to correct me, feel free to do it, or ask questions, whatever you want. But that gives you something on the table to put forward. Thank you.
Sherry Mueller, American University. Two quick questions. One, there's a great book, The Ayatollah in the Cathedral, written by Moorhead Kennedy, and one of the points he makes is we underestimate the role of religion, and I just wondered if you would comment on that, as well as your thoughts. Yes, we need stronger defense, but don't we need stronger soft power, and shouldn't we quit squandering our soft power?
I think I certainly agree with both points. I'm not sure how much to elaborate, but yes, religion is still a major force in the world, and not least a major force in the Islamic, what we call the Islamic world. The Islamic world is not monolithic by any means. You heard the Indonesian president at the UN General Assembly had a remarkable speech in which he talked about American constitutional principles, the Declaration of Independence, how it inspired him. Jefferson, it was really, and that's a country of what, 285 million people, and almost a month. Really good to hear that. Okay, but you know, it's nice to think that. I mean, the hostages have gone home. That's wonderful for Israelis, wonderful for Jews around the world. Hamas has not given up, and it's based on its theology. And this was a battle and a war that is 1,400 years old. The jihad started 1,400 years ago, right? With an Islamic army that sprang out of Arabia and conquered almost all of the civilized world, all the way through North Africa, up into Spain, going all the way to what is today Pakistan, and then further Indonesia and Malaysia and all that. The jihadis understand something very that most of the Americans, I hope your students understand. Islam and Islamic empires and caliphates ruled the world for more than 1,000 years. The notion that that's over forever, the Muslim Brotherhood rose just a few years after what happened? The fall of the Ottoman Empire, which was what? The Ottoman Caliphate, the last caliphate. And the Muslim Brotherhood, the whole idea was we have to restore the caliphate. We can't let these Jews and Christians rule the world. And this is, this is hard for a lot of people to grasp. The media doesn't seem to grasp it. Christians are being slaughtered in places like Nigeria by Islamists and jihadis, and it doesn't get any news coverage. This is something that we at FDD have just been talking about that we want to spend a lot more time on, a lot more attention on. We've been talking actually with people in the White House who say, I wish you would. Thank you. Okay, we take that advice. Anyhow, so yes, and you're right about soft power. Look, I think that political America was corrupted in many ways over the years, many ways. If you're destroying it, it's not. I'd rather see it reformed than destroyed. If it's going to be destroyed, then maybe it should be rebuilt because it is something we need. But we need it for communicating American ideas, not least those of the whatever administration's in power, I would say, to the world. We need to be able to do that at a time when Al Jazeera is communicating Islamist ideas. Now, I think Trump is putting some screws on Qatar. We'll see how that's true, and not maybe at Al Jazeera. We'll see. We do need to communicate out there, and we don't have that means right now. But Voice of America shouldn't just be NPR financed by tax dollars. No. There's a lot of people there who thought that's what it should do. And the first Trump administration, it had no interest in the administration's point of view on anything. But anything it was anti-administration. And I could tell you, I mean, I go into it, Michael Pack was made the first CEO of the U.S. Agency for Global Media. He was blocked from taking that position for more than 3 of the 4 years of the Trump administration. They sued him, they accused him of all kinds of things. They wouldn't let him take it. The whole idea of having a CEO of a U.S. Agency for Global Media was that it would straddle administrations. And you know what? On the first day in office, Biden fired. First day in office. So I do understand, even if I don't agree, why Trump said, get rid of the whole damn thing. It's not reparable. It's just, whatever. I mean, screw it. Anyway, there's quick answer. Not so quick. I guess so, yeah, that's sure.
Well, as you found out today, I tend to ask long questions. I'll try to make the long questions short. Most of us were around at the time of the fall of the Berlin Wall and the Soviet Union's announced going out of business, Gorbachev's going out of business announcement for the Soviet Union. And in the ensuing years of the 90s, maybe into the early 2000s, we thought that the world had fundamentally changed. Many dictatorial governments of Africa converted to democracies. The National Endowment for Democracy here and its institutes were helping a number of countries transition to democracy. All of Central Europe did, much of the Caucasus and Central Asia did very perfectly in the case of the Stans, and so forth. And even the remaining dictatorships, China, North Korea, Iran, seemed, well, somehow more quiescent than they are today. What went wrong? Did we mess up, or are the resurgence of the axis of aggressors, is that resurgence something exogenous to our mistakes?
Well, the axis of aggressors it will be a big part of the problem because they're not interested in helping to nurture democratic societies, quite the contrary, right? So that is, but it's also creating democratic societies. This thing persists. It's a hard thing to do. It's not. I'm not sure a lot of these societies can do that. I think I would argue, not everybody can agree with this, that you're not going to achieve that in a lot of places. But if you could achieve rule of law and minority rights, and that sort of thing, that's progress. And maybe that's where you got to leave it for the time being. A lot of, I lived in Africa for 3 years. Democracy is not an easy thing to create. And a lot of the countries, a place like Africa, they're not natural countries. They're a group of they're ethnic groups, tribes. They don't like the word tribes. I don't like the word tribes. Pushed together, and somehow, House of Fulani and Yoruba and Igbo were all supposed to think, yeah, we're all Nigerians. Really? Really? I don't know. Not that, I mean, again, it can evolve that way over time. You say, yeah, my sister's married to an Igbo. He's a great guy. I love him. That can happen, but it doesn't happen overnight. So this is difficult, which is why I say be more modest. I would argue if you want to be more modest, you can say, not everybody, you at least want to see some basic human rights. I think we have to commit to that, respected, not violated. Paul.
So I'm so happy that you're talking about Africa. I'm often told that if you do something on Africa, everybody will yawn. But from what I'm told, from what I hear, by 2050, 1 in 4, 1 in 5 people on the planet is going to be African. We've lost Niger, we've lost Burkina Faso, a host of other countries. Is the whole African continent going to become a new caliphate for ISIS and Al Qaeda in Africa?
It's a real danger, and other parts of the continent might become colonies of, for example, the People's Republic of China and of Russia. When you talk about places like Mali, the French were forced out. Who replaced them? The Wagner Group, essentially, the Russians did. Why? Because the Russians say to the rulers, you don't have to do any damn thing, except let us take, I don't know, the diamonds or whatever it is, let us rape your women, don't let your laws don't apply to us. If you understand that, we'll protect you, okay? And that sounds like a good deal to a lot of them. China is China is getting most of its cobalt. About 70% of the cobalt comes from the Democratic Republic of the Congo. It's being mined largely by children by hand who don't even have gloves. The environmental destruction in that country is enormous at this point. And China is behind all of it. They're getting cheap cobalt, which is necessary for all these green energy solutions. Right? They do this. They bribe the people who are within the political and whatever other elite there is. They say, you're going to be rich. Don't worry about these, again, the children in the mines who are poisoning themselves with the cobalt and go home to a hut that doesn't have electricity. And by the way, you see a lot in the media about this? Oh, you don't see a lot. You see a little. I've written about it a little bit. There's a good book by a guy called Red Cobalt, something like that. That's very good on this side. There's a little bit, but not a lot. So, it's interesting. On the campuses, they all care about imperialism. It's only British and European imperialism of the 19th century. Imperialism is taking place right now. And they don't care, or they don't know because maybe their professors don't tell them. But Chinese imperialism, Russian forms of imperialism, and Islamic imperialism, this is happening right now. And I see very little to be optimistic about vis-a-vis Africa at this moment.
Other questions? If not, we owe you a great we have a little something before you.
Thank you very much.
To remember an afternoon with the Council of American Ambassadors.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you all for coming to the conference today. I hope it's been enriching, enlightening, stimulating. And I hope I will see you this evening at Todd Sedgwick's and Christie's home to enjoy their hospitality. Have a great afternoon and we'll see you tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good luck, tears here.
Yes.
Navigate.
Yeah.
Campus.
Nice to meet you.